I'm glad you're all here. Thanks so much for coming. I'm Kathleen Reel. I'm the program manager for the Independent Living Resource Center, and I'm also the chair of your voluntary organizations active in disaster. So usually we do this introduction thing where we go around the room, but in the interest of time and the number of people we have here, I'd just like to make mention that we have a lot of wonderful groups here today that are represented at Unity Shop. We have our county OEM, our city offices of emergency services are here for Goleta and Carpinteria. We have our first responders here. We have a few of our people from the Red Cross who registered, but unfortunately many of them weren't going to be able to make it today because they've had to set up a shelter for the Hill Fire up north in the San Luis Obispo area. So let's all think good thoughts for them up there. And just a quick thing about why we have a VOAD and why we meet regularly. That can be answered by one question I'm going to pose to you. When is a better time to know your community partners that you may need during a disaster? Before or after the disaster? Let's hear it. Before. There's your answer. I'd like to introduce Rob Lewin. He's the director of the Santa Barbara County Office of Emergency Services, and he's going to be introducing our speaker for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, and on behalf of all the emergency managers in the county, we're so thankful for VOAD and all the members of VOAD for all that you do and all that we anticipate that you're going to do when disaster strikes our county. It is really a pleasure for me today to introduce an incredible person. Not only is she an amazing author, she's a compassionate person who understands the impact of a disaster on people. And this didn't come just out of passion for that. It came because she was impacted by a disaster. Let me go through her bio here for a second. She's a speaker, an author, a resilience mentor. Sandra Miller Younger lost her home, 12 neighbors, and almost her own life in 2003 during the Cedar Fire, the biggest wildfire in modern California history. With a journalism degree from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, Syracuse University, plus 30 years of professional experience, she felt compelled to capture the historic Cedar Fire story for posterity. Her resulting book, The Fire Outside My Window, Survivors Tells a True Story of California's Epic Cedar Fire, has been hailed as required reading for residents of wildfire country and adopted as training next to top-level emergency professionals. Sandra now shares the lessons of the Cedar Fire as an international speaker and television guest. She and her husband Bob were featured on the NBC Dateline special Escape, the Great California Fire. As the founder of the Comeback Solutions, Sandra also works as a consultant with disaster survivors, top-level emergency professionals, and other mission-driven leaders to build resilience, the skill that can transform disaster into opportunity, loss into legacy. And with that, I'd like to read an excerpt from her book, a book that challenged me individually, as I was in the fire service and wildland fire community my entire career. I had been on some of California's worst calamities that we experienced during my time. And during that time, I did not, all those years of doing it, I did not understand the impact of disaster on the people that I was serving. And it was after I read this book that I began to understand what it is like to be a survivor of a disaster. And with that, I hope that I'm a more compassionate emergency manager. And that's what I hope that we'll gain out of this today. I hope that this is the beginning of our quest to be able to be better at what we do in our quest to serve our community that needs us so much during a disaster. From her book. At first, I thought our escape might actually be easy. Pulling away from Terra Nova, her home, Bob and I drove into a pocket of clear night that put the swirling embers and brilliant flames behind us. It seemed my fear about reaching the main road half a mile down the mountain on the canyon floor had been overblown. All I had to do was drive out. But just past the edge of our property where the chaparral closes in tight, we hit the smoke. Dense, dark, impenetrable. Like looking out the window of a plane into a thunderhead. Something inside me, something more knowing than thinking, shouted, "The brush here is ready to explode. Go, move, get out of here now." I wanted to hit the accelerator, but I couldn't see the pavement. I couldn't see anything, and the shoulder of the road cut into the hillside fell off sharply to the right. "I can't see," I yelled. "Don't wreck the car," Bob shouted back. He reached toward the dashboard and hit the recirculate button, a brilliant move that kept the car from filling with smoke. "Just don't wreck the car." What he meant was, don't drive off the edge. We'd rounded the big boulder that forced the road into a sudden swerve. That much danger at least lay behind us. But just ahead, I knew the asphalt narrowed into that steep, shiny grade, and I couldn't begin to find it. "I can't see the road, but you'll have to remember where it is." Bob was barely in his seat, clutching the grab bar above the door with his right hand like a commuter on the lurching subway train. He wanted to be driving his truck instead of riding shotgun in my sports coupe. He wanted to feel more protected, more in control. His voice sounded odd, forced, almost cracking, and I realized I was having trouble talking, too. My mouth was so dry, my tongue barely worked. "I can't see," I kept saying. "I can't see the road." It was all gray, all pea soup. I tried the high beams, even worse. I can't see anything. At that moment, some kind of animal, something fairly big, jumped out of the chaparral and landed directly in front of my right headlight, maybe even glanced off the bumper. My foot found the brake pedal. "Did I hit it? Oh, I hope I didn't hit it." I felt relieved when the animal immediately righted itself and dashed off. What was it, a coyote? No, not a coyote, something different. Animals run just ahead of fire. That knowing voice again. And then I realized, oh God, this fire is right on top of us. Bob and I both had seen the creature, a blur, hardly more than phantom. It charged straight ahead, visible in the headlights for only an instant before disappearing into the murk, its feet seeming never to touch the ground, except I knew they had, just as before, every one morning on my way to work, here in the same place and right in the middle of the road. It's the bobcat. It's on the road. Follow it. I gunned the engine, aiming for the spot in the smoke where the animal had disappeared. When we got there, I could make out two fields of fuzzy red lights spreading right and left, and dark path between them. "Oh my God," I heard myself shouting. "Oh my God." Everything below was on fire. It never occurred to me to turn back. It never occurred to me that we might die. We had to keep moving. We had to get through. That was all. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands and aimed the Acura toward the darkness that was the road, and we crept down the steepest part of the mountain, finding asphalt all the way. At the bottom, where the pavement gave way to dirt and gravel, we burst into an alien dimension, a dark world veiled in smoke. It's only by throbbing red and orange smears of light. I could see little farther now, but not far enough. A drainage ditch at the road's edge loomed just ahead. "Watch it," Bob's voice cracked in the darkness. I swerved back toward the center and tried to hold a steady course, negotiating as best I could between the lines of fire. Bob talked me through it. Right, left, straight. It took both of us to find the way. Sandra Miller Younger.
Wow. I've never heard anyone else read that. I have goosebumps. It was pretty dramatic, huh? Well, thank you, Rob, and thank you all for being here and for accompanying me on a little flashback into my fire trauma. I want to thank you to begin with for everything you do. You are here in service of a mission that is near and dear to my heart, because as you can tell, I do have some personal experience with disasters. So today, we're going to be talking about a couple of things. We're going to be talking about an area of disaster management and recovery that is all too often a missing link, and that is the emotional side of disaster recovery, the human element. And I think Rob did a good job of explaining why this is so important for emergency professionals and emergency volunteers to understand, because so often in that capacity, you're focused on the incident. You're focused on just getting people out of the way, putting the fire out, doing the mission that you've trained for. and sometimes the actual impact on people is lost. We're also going to be talking about the power of a story, and I think this was an example of how powerful a story can be. How many of you were kind of moved by that? How many of you felt your pulse going up a little? I did, and I knew how it was going to end, right? So I want to tell you from the outset that even if you don't have a Bobcat story, your personal stories are powerful. Your personal stories have brought you here today. There is something in your story that has given you a big why when it comes to serving others. So we're going to be looking at that today. You know, we teach our community members to prepare for disasters. We teach them how to pack a go bag, how to harden their homes, and we teach our first responders and we teach our disaster workers tactics and principles to use in dealing with the aftermath, dealing with the response in the aftermath of disasters. But in my experience, in the experience of many other disaster survivors and emergency workers, we don't spend nearly enough time preparing ourselves for the emotional trauma of disasters. These events are dramatic and they do take a toll, and too often we just think, well, okay, it's part of the job. I feel kind of affected by this, but I got to just suck it up and go on. Anybody ever have that attitude in a disaster? Yeah. So I want to put a spotlight today on some tools that I found in the aftermath of the Cedar Fire and my own disaster experience that can help us be better prepared and be stronger in our response for other people. So let's look at this first slide here. I don't want you to miss the significance of this. It's more than a placeholder. This photograph was made on our property after the fire. What do you notice about this bird? She's rebuilding. She's rebuilding. Or maybe it's a he, I don't know. Maybe Dad was helping here. But this little bird didn't question whether or not to rebuild her home after the fire. Can you see she's sitting on a burned branch? This is the resilience that is in our DNA. This is what we all have because we are resilient beings. And Bob and I were inspired by this little bird sitting on a burned branch, and we decided this is what we're doing too. We're rebuilding, we're coming back, we're reclaiming our home, we're rebooting, we're starting over. So let me give you an idea of what's possible here. What's possible is the concept, first of all, that resilience is not just in our DNA. It's not just something we either have or don't have. First of all, I would argue we all have it. Some of us might think, well, I'm less resilient than this person's more resilient than I am. Resilience is also a skill set that we can learn, that we can practice, that we can share, that will help us be better equipped and more and bouncier, I'm going to use that word, so we can bounce back from disaster more easily than before. So today, this is one thing we're going to learn, that resilience is a skill set we can practice, and it is the tool that enables us to transform disasters of any stripe, it doesn't have to be a natural disaster, into opportunity and possibilities, and even transform loss into legacy. We're going to look at those possibilities today. And I'm also going to talk a little bit more, as I mentioned, about unlocking the power of your own story. You have comeback stories. All of us in this room, we've been here on this planet long enough to have overcome a few challenges, right? Anybody here never have a challenge in your life? Anyone? No. So we got these challenges. We overcame them. Let's talk about how to unlock the power of those personal stories to make us more effective in what we do as disaster workers and emergency professionals. They can make us more confident and effective. Today you're going to learn these 5 scientifically proven principles that I discovered through my own experience, principles that contribute to building resilience. and that can help us come back from any sort of setback. We're going to learn how to use these principles to come back from disasters stronger and wiser than before, faster than we might otherwise. And we're going to learn why digging deeper into the power of your own story can help you become better and more effective in your job as emergency professionals and volunteers. This workshop is for you if you are an emergency professional. As I can see by your outfits, some of you, that you fall into that category. The rest of you are disaster workers and volunteers. This workshop is for you. This workshop is for members of your community who stand to be affected by future disasters. And this workshop is for you if you are facilitating some sort of organization or even corporation that also is going to be affected by disasters. The lights are dimming. Okay, I see. That's right, so you can see now. So if that sounds like you, you're in the right place. I want to make you a promise. We only have a little bit of time, and I have so much I want to share with you. So I'm going to give you as much information as I can today, and then before I leave, I'm going to tell you how you can learn more if you'd like to, and I also have a gift for you that will help you take these principles a little further. Sound good? Okay. So I want to start with a question. What was it for you? What unexpected bombshell fell out of the sky and left a crater so deep that it divided your whole life into before and after? Anybody have an experience like that? Yeah. A lot of us have had those experiences. It's different things for different people. It could be an accident, an injury. It could be a devastating diagnosis. It could be a financial setback or some reversal in your career. It could even be the loss of a loved one. For me, it happened almost 14 years ago when my husband Bob and I woke up in the middle of the night in the middle of the biggest wildfire in modern California history. In the months and years that followed that event of October 2003, I learned more than I ever wanted to learn about filing insurance claims. Fun, huh? I learned how to rebuild a house from an ash heap, ashes and twisted metal. I learned how to reboot a life from the ash heap of unexpected circumstances. And I learned that it's possible to transform disaster into opportunity and even loss into legacy. So Rob has given you a little bit of the details of what happened after we woke up in the middle of the night and saw fire outside our window. We had been in this beautiful house in the country for 7 months. We had moved from the suburbs to start a new chapter of our lives. Our kids were finishing college, and we loved it. We did give it a name, Terra Nova, because it just seemed like a special place. We thought it needed a name. Terra Nova means our new land. It seemed fitting for our new chapter, and 7 months later, fire outside our windows. So we did escape. We only had minutes to grab our pets, 2 giant Newfoundland dogs and a brainless cockatiel named Chelsea. So brainless that even though I was the one who fed her and took care of her, she always hissed at me, loved my husband. So that's why I feel like I'm totally justified in calling her brainless. So we grabbed these critters. We grabbed a few pictures off the dressers and walls, and I threw them in a laundry basket that I grabbed out of the closet, and we were out of there in my little Acura coupe because we could not find the keys to Bob's giant Suburban. Pre-disaster preparation, all right? Very important. So here's what happened. After we made it out, miraculously, by the next morning, this was all that was left of our beautiful Terra Nova, and 12 of our neighbors were dead, and everyone, including the media, was calling us fire victims. So we didn't get that part because we were alive. You heard what we drove through. Is it a miracle or not that I'm standing here talking to you? It's a miracle. 12 of our neighbors didn't make it out, doing the same thing we were doing at the same time. How could we be victims? So, as a journalist, as well as a fire survivor, I did feel compelled to tell this story, especially on behalf of my neighbors who were not going to be able to tell it for themselves. So I started interviewing everyone I knew, including some of the firefighters that some of you know. This is how I met Rob, through our mutual friends, and I know some of you from Montecito down the road know some of the people in my book. I started interviewing all of these people, well over 100, and I discovered that not everyone who had been affected by this disaster reacted the same way. In fact, I found that some of the people who had lost the least were the most bitter about it. I talked with people who had lost multiple family members, and they weren't bitter. They said, the fire has already taken so much. We're not going to let it take any more. We're not going to let it take our future. We're not going to let it take our joy. This is from a woman who had to bury her 16-year-old daughter. And yet, a man who had lost his garage was the most bitter person I met. So I started to wonder what was going on here. And I realized you get to choose. You may not get to choose what happens to you all the time, but we always get to choose our response. This was new to me. I didn't realize this. So I started to wonder, what else could we do to help facilitate our recovery besides making this choice about our response? And I did some research, and I discovered that lots of other people had beaten me to this question. And psychologists and academics and other professionals in that field had amassed a huge body of work on this, on the human capacity for resilience, and that's what they called it. They called it resilience. There's even a subset of the resilience literature called post-traumatic growth. How cool is that? What do we usually fill in that blank with? Post-traumatic stress. But it's possible for some people to take a disaster of any description and turn it into fuel to power them to a better life. So I thought, I want to know more about this. And I read a lot of these studies, and I boiled them down to 5 principles that I'm going to share with you. But what I wanted to do first is to just distinguish the types of resilience we're talking about here. In emergency services, you often hear the word resilience, right? It's kind of a buzzword these days. The FEMA website has a great big white paper on resilience, but they're talking about economic resilience. They're talking about how to repair your infrastructure, how to rebuild your homes and your businesses, how to get your economy moving again. There's barely a nod to the health and human services part of it, but resilience is about more than dollars and cents. Resilience is about hearts and minds. So when I use the word resilience, I'm talking about personal resilience. And here's a definition of it. Resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant stress. It means bouncing back. There's that bounce back characteristic again. From difficult experiences, research has shown that resilience is ordinary, not extraordinary. Resilience is in our DNA, just like Mama Bird. Being resilient does not mean you never go through any tragedies or difficulties, because we all do. It's not a trait that people either have or don't have. It involves behaviors, thoughts, and actions that can be learned and developed in anyone. I didn't make this up. This came from the American Psychological Association. So we're talking about a subject that has been proven through experience, including my own, and through empirical research. I like that fact. So I did boil this down to these 5 steps that I call the comeback formula. Everything I read about resilience can be deposited into one of these 5 buckets. And I'm going to go through it quickly for you, and then we're going to practice a few of these things, okay? Will you play with me? We practice? All right. So here's the comeback formula. I started with the word come. Come to a place of gratitude. The research shows that gratitude is just about the most powerful antidote we have to any sort of negative emotion. And if we can find even one thing to be grateful for, even one thing, even in the middle of tragedy, it helps to keep us from getting stuck in the quicksand of bitterness and blame and resentment and anger that is a part of the comeback journey, but not a place we want to get stuck. Finding something to be grateful for is the first step in releasing ourselves from this quicksand and being able to rise above it to healing and growth and perhaps even transformation. That's the power of gratitude. And then the next 4 steps of the comeback formula follow the letters BACK. So the first of these is to be patient with the process. Now, you all in your comeback journeys, we've established that we've all been through a comeback journey. It didn't get better overnight, did it? I mean, there's a painful process that happens here, and we have to be patient with that. In my case, first of all, it was easy for me to find a point of gratitude because I was alive. Second of all, I believed that I could come back, but I also had to be patient with the process. I wanted to be back in my beautiful house like the next day, and it was gone, and it took us almost 2 years to rebuild. I had to be patient with that. I had to be patient with the process of saying goodbye in my heart to everything that I'd ever owned, especially those non-replaceables like kids' pictures and the little things they make for you in school and bring home, and the heirlooms and your mom's wedding dress and all of those things that insurance doesn't replace. That's a grieving process. So be patient with that pain. The process will keep rolling and you won't be stuck there forever, especially if you believe, and this is the second part of the B, that you can come back, that you do have resilience in your DNA, that you are capable. Then the next step is to accept help and be tough enough to ask when you need it. This is the hardest one. We're going to spend a little time on this, especially those of you in uniform. It's hard to call 911 when you are 911, right? Yeah. It's kind of tough. It's tough for all of us, actually. C is to choose your response. This is what I learned. There's an element of agency here. I can choose how I want to respond to this, even if I didn't get to choose how it happened. And then K is to keep moving forward. We can't stay stuck in the past because so many elements of that past are gone. It's never coming back. What we can do is to look forward and to embrace these possibilities and opportunities that are available to us now in this new future that we hadn't planned on, that we didn't ask for, but that always includes new opportunities. So this is a quick overview of the comeback formula. And yes, we did rebuild. This is the result after 2 years of construction and insurance claims. And we rebuilt beautiful Terra Nova on the same spot. That's Bob and me about 3 years after the fire, so 2006. All right, so let's move ahead here. The comeback formula isn't just for people like me who are disaster survivors. And by the way, I do not ascribe to the term victim, remember? So we don't want to call people disaster victims. We want to call them at least survivors, and eventually they'll become victors with the right support too. So it wasn't just for me. It's for people like you. It's for disaster workers, also subject to trauma. I've talked with people who helped after Katrina who said people in New Orleans threw stuff at them on the street, screamed obscenities at them because they thought they were interlopers who were coming to, tell them what to do when they were just there to help, these volunteers. So disaster workers, you can tell me, sometimes you probably encounter a little resistance to your efforts. And certainly you're right in the middle of the trauma. So this is for you. And of course, we're concerned about our emergency professionals. You carry enormous stress. I mean, I was in this fire for half an hour, and it marked me for life. And our first responders go into these extreme situations over and over and over again. It leaves a mark. So let's take a deeper look at this now and see how this can play out in our own lives. The first principle of the comeback formula is come to a place of gratitude. So in this step, you're going to learn how powerful gratitude really is. And I want you to find the very high-tech tool that I left on each of your seats. Have you found it? The high-tech tool. And I hope you have a pen or something to write with. All right, maybe you can share because you won't have to write down a lot. So we're going to talk about how powerful gratitude is, and I'm going to give you a way that you can build your gratitude muscle, because it is a muscle, and incorporate more thankfulness into your everyday life. Mom was right. Did you have a mom, as I did, and as I was to my kids, who said, you better write Grandma a thank you note for that Christmas gift, especially if you ever want to get another one. Did you have a mom like that? Yeah, Mom was right. Here's what we know about thankfulness. It is so powerful. It is the antidote to almost every negative emotion. Gratitude is the first step in healing, growth, and recovery, and in embracing a new future with new opportunities, in writing your way into a new story and living a new story. We know that gratitude is positively related to optimism, satisfaction, vitality, happiness, self-esteem, empathy, supportiveness. Who wants more of that? I do. Being ungrateful is linked to anxiety, depression, envy, materialism, and loneliness. Who wants some of that? No, thank you. All right, so this is all from empirical research, from scientific studies. Gratitude helps us cope. Traumatic memories are less likely to surface and are less intense when they do in people who are regularly grateful. That's cool. People instinctively express gratitude when they're confronted with adversity. Most people do. I'm not so sure about the guy who lost his garage. But again, this is great research that tells us how powerful gratitude really is. So I have an exercise that will help us boost our gratitude muscle. Are you up for this? You already said yes, so you're in. Take out your index card and write down a couple things that you're grateful for, like 2 or 3 things that you're grateful for. And by the way, when you've got that, flip over your card and number it 1 to 5. And number 1 is come to a place of gratitude. We're just going to write down the steps of the comeback formula as we go. We know that even if you take time out once a week, just once a week, to consciously think about what you're grateful for, to count your blessings, it helps to lift your mood. It helps to create more positivity in your life, all those good things that we all said we wanted. So let's practice this right now. First of all, I want to see if my hunch is right here. Who would like to share what they're grateful for? Why are we giggling? Why is it funny? Nobody's jumping out. That's all right. I'm going to call people out. So, all right, who wants to share? Who wants to volunteer? You're volunteers. You're a room of volunteers. Yes, sir.
Okay. A loving family. God in my life.
Excellent. Anybody have some of those? Anybody have job on their list? Yeah. Family? Yeah. Spirituality? What was the other one? Friends. How about health? Anybody put health? Yeah. These are the typical things we come up with. And yes, we are grateful for these. What I want to do to get you really in touch with the true level of gratitude here is we're going to take it from the head. These are all concepts, right? Family, job, health. We're going to take it this distance from the head to the heart. And here's how I want you to do this. I want you to find a partner. Be brave. I know some of you don't want to do this. Be brave, find a partner, and I want you to just share one thing from your list that you're grateful for, and then I want your partner, all right, the person with the shortest hair go first, all right? People with no hair, you're winners already. So the person with the shortest hair, share one thing from your list that you're grateful for, and the other person, your job is to just ask one question. Why? Why are you grateful for that? So, Rob, do you want to model this with me? Are you? Sure. Okay. All right, so get close enough to. So, Rob, what's one thing on your list that you're grateful for?
My children.
Why are you grateful for your children?
It's emotional. It's the ultimate expression of love, children.
He's already there. You see what just happened? If you say, I'm grateful for my children, that's in your head. You can say that without really getting to why you're grateful. All right, you're an A student. You got there very fast. All right, do you see what, this is what we're doing. Now, it's not like I'm Barbara Walters out to make you cry, but if you messed up a little bit, that's totally allowed. That's how you know you're there. All right, so I want you to do that for like a couple minutes, and then we're going to switch partners, okay? Ready? Go. Thank you for being courageous enough to do that and to share with someone else something personal. So, what happened? Did you? Bravo. All right, bravo. Why do you think you cried? Why do we cry when we get really into the reasons we're grateful? Anyone? Right. We realize how important it is to us. So in our everyday lives, the next time we're ticked off because somebody cut us off in traffic, or there's not enough money left at the end of the month, or whatever, this is where you can pull out your high-tech tool and remember the things that you're grateful for. Now, if we do this even once a week, scientifically, we should experience more positivity in our life. So what is something you do one time a week that would make it easy for you to remember to be grateful? Yes. Right. So that's terrific. She's already put this practice into motion, right? Most of us are not quite there yet. So that's why I suggest that you find something that you do once a week. Maybe, I don't know, if you go to church every Sunday, if you go to bowling on a Tuesday night, whatever you do once a week, make a little note on the front of your card of what that is, the time that you're going to remember to be grateful. And see if that boosts your attitude. And remember, it's like working out. I mean, the first time you do it, probably you're not going to think, oh, wow, suddenly I'm like Mr. Optimism. But it's one rep, like in the gym. So as we practice gratitude, it will lift our attitudes. That rhymes. All right. Anyone else have anything they want to share about that exercise? If there's one piece of this resilience puzzle that I think is most important, this is it. So that's why I start with this. I also want to take this opportunity to say these principles are not necessarily linear or chronological. I was just speaking in Winnipeg, Manitoba, to the Manitoba Emergency Managers Conference, and one man got up and was courageous enough to share that he had just been coming back from 9 months of disability after a back injury. And it was really painful. He wasn't finding the help that he needed. He had to go to doctor after doctor. And he was very candid about how that threw him into depression. And he said, it wasn't until I was able to accept help, which is a couple of principles down the list here of 5, that I could be grateful. So that was a good point, because it reminds us that this doesn't happen in any order. These are all principles that contribute to resilience. Okay, so ready to move on. Be patient and believe that you can. Patience, perseverance, and confidence are key to coming back from disaster. So you can turn your card over and write that one down too. Be patient and believe that you can come back. Disaster and loss do set us back. It's agonizing. I'm not here to put a glossy sheen on this whole thing and say, oh, buck up. It's not so bad. It is bad. It's really bad sometimes. I went to talk with another resilience mentor named Druk. He's a psychologist. He has a pretty big following out there on the internet. He's written a number of books, and his story, his comeback story, is that he lost his 20-year-old daughter, Jenna Druk, in a bus accident in India, where she was studying as a student. And he went on to found a couple of foundations and nonprofits in her honor. But I went to him and I said, Ken, how can I be sure that I am allowing room for the gravity of loss, for the depth of grief? And as I talk about this, because I don't want it to sound flip, like, oh, just bounce right back. I've heard some so-called gurus say that. You can bounce back immediately from anything. Well, no, you can't. It's a process. When you have an injury, when you have surgery, when you have a cold, you don't bounce back the next day, no matter how positive a thinker you are. So he said, you're right. You need to be patient with the process. And that's where I got this part of it, being patient. And he said, sometimes it takes a long time to even believe or to even have the idea that it's possible to come back. And I think that's what my friend in Manitoba was seeing. He said, but eventually, you do realize, eventually, the light sneaks in through the cracks and you see that there might be a possibility here of coming back. So that's my wisdom that I gained from someone who suffered a truly, truly deep loss. Recovery is individual. Some people are going to come back faster than others. We can't compare ourselves. It's individual. It's a journey, and it's a key step in the overall comeback journey. It's not unusual after a loss to wonder if you can ever come back. I know after the fire, people tried to be so nice and ask us over for dinner. And I remember this one place we went, and I didn't know these people very well. They were coworkers of my husband, and I didn't really want to go. This is maybe 2 weeks after the fire. We're barely out of a hotel room into a rental house. I had nothing. And this couple said, this night is all about you. We want you to relax. We want to take care of you. I didn't know them at all. I didn't want to be there. And then they proceeded to take me on a tour of their home and show me every piece of art and tell me where they've gotten it and all their little tchotchkes. And I'm thinking, really? Because I got nothing. I didn't think it was possible for me to ever have a fully furnished home again. I had lost so much. So sometimes we can't see it right away. We have to persevere. All right. So here's another exercise. You can find a new friend or you can find your same partner. I want you to think about a time that you came back. Think of 2 times, actually, that you persevered through a challenge. And one time should be something that you chose to do. If anybody ever chose to go get a college degree, that's a challenge. It takes a lot of years. If any of you chose to be parents, oh my God, that never ends, never. The challenge there. So there are challenges that we choose, and then there are challenges that are thrust upon us. So the purpose of this exercise is to think about something that you chose to do, and how did you make it through that? And then to think about something you didn't choose. Maybe that was your bombshell moment that I mentioned at the beginning. How did you make it through that? What did you learn from that? So just share for a second. You can share either experience, actually. All right, how about the longest haired person goes first this time. We'll mix it up, all right? So let's put, and if neither one of you have any hair, I don't know, you'll have to work it out. All right, so a couple of minutes here. Okay. Anybody want to share with us what happened there? Did you realize how resilient you really are? You did. It's amazing she's still here, she says. Do you want to elaborate on that at all? No, she doesn't. That's fine. I'm not going to make you cry in front of the room. Anybody else want to talk about what they realized about their own resilience from those stories? Yeah. You don't. Okay, thank you for that. So what he's saying, for those of you who maybe could not hear, is that life is a bit a buddy system. Life is best undertaken as a buddy system, and he can't think of any really challenging situation that it's possible to get through in isolation. Is that a fair summary of what you said? How many of you agree? When we work on teams, when we work together as teams of volunteers, as teams of emergency professionals, as neighbors and families, we are always depending on each other, right? Because we are social animals. Now, my cat, I don't know about him. He does depend on me for breakfast, and then he wants second breakfast, and sometimes he wants third breakfast. I don't know what it is about this cat. He's always hungry, so he depends on me for that. But otherwise, he's pretty independent. And if I let him out, I'm sure he would feed himself with no problem. Cats are different than people. We love our cats, but we're different. We're wired differently. We are social animals. You don't see one ant in an anthill. It's a whole colony. You don't just see one bee in a hive or one wolf as a pack. We are like them in that we run in groups and we operate best in groups. So why is it when something really gnarly happens to us and somebody wants to help us, we say, oh, no, I'm good. I don't need any help. I'm fine. I'm tough. Gonna suck it up. Gonna soldier on. That's what we do. That is not what we do. We get help from each other. This is what I want to surface here in this conversation, and especially for our emergency professionals who have for way too long been told, as one of my wildland firefighter buddies said, shut up and dig. Shut up and dig. I don't want to hear about your trauma. I don't want to hear that you were emotionally affected by something. What a wuss. Just do your job. That's what we've told our emergency professionals for, I don't know, decades, a couple hundred years. That is not okay. That is not okay. And what I want to do is contribute to a growing conversation that is finally admitting that these jobs are traumatic, emotionally traumatic, and that it is okay as a human being to be affected by trauma, to be affected by the pain and suffering of other people. And it's okay to talk about that. So when I talk with top-level incident commanders and emergency leaders, I say, make it okay in your organization for your people to talk about their experiences and give them the resources they need to work through that. So let me give you a couple of examples. It's true for the public too, for members of the community. Bob and I, after we drove out, after we followed the Bobcat to safety, we thought, wow, that was intense. We've been through something here and we don't fully understand the potential effects. And we don't want to get stuck along the way. We didn't want to run off the road of our emotional comeback any more than we'd wanted to run off the actual road in the smoke and be lost. So what we did was we found a professional counselor, and we called him and we said, we just drove out of our neighborhood through smoke and fire. We lost our house. We lost 12 of our neighbors, and we may be a little affected by this. We're just guessing. Maybe this is going to leave a mark. And will you monitor us for a while we come back? And he said, get in here now. So, because we tend to discount our situation. It's just our life. You know, it's just what happened to us. And other people are going to hear the same story and go, oh my gosh. So he said, get in here now. And he really helped us to understand our reactions, our responses, what we were feeling, what we were experiencing. He gave us a prescription for Ambien, the sleep aid, for just like a week or so, because we were having nightmares and we couldn't sleep. And he had us come in like every couple weeks for, I don't know, maybe 6 months. And then he said, you're fine. Get out of here. I don't know anyone else affected by the fire, any other community members who did that. Some of our neighbors had to jump into their swimming pool because they couldn't get out. The fire had crossed their road and they were trapped. And so they jumped into their swimming pool, and their house burned down like, I don't know, 15 feet away from them. They were in the pool with rats and rabbits and snakes because we were all reduced to animals scrambling for survival. And they finally had to jump out of their pool because these giant brands that used to be pieces of their house were blowing in this horrific wind and falling on their heads. And then they went and sat on a rock in a clearing and waited for the fire to die down, hours and hours. And he's telling me this story. I'm researching my book, and I said, geez, Bob, did you all get some counseling after that? And he said, no, but we probably should have. We were kind of a basket case. No joke. Come on. So I want to add this to this conversation, that asking for help is not only wise, it's essential in a successful comeback journey. And sometimes that help includes kinds of help that we haven't considered before. And it's okay, whatever you need to get that and to make it available to your teams. Sometimes it's the hardest thing of all to ask for help. It really is a struggle. Another thing that helped me was a friend of mine who also happened to be a psychologist, not the same person we went to, noticed that I was having a little trouble accepting all the goodies that people were bringing me. I mean, people were coming out of the woodwork, not just to invite us to dinner and show us their art, but to bring us like hand-me-down clothes and casseroles and furniture, because we had nothing, right? I mean, we had to stop at a grocery store and buy toothbrushes on our way out of our neighborhood. And writing us checks and gift cards, and I was the one used to being the giver and the helper, I would take stuff to St. Vincent de Paul in the back there. I would take stuff to Goodwill. I would write the checks for World Vision and the Red Cross and all of that. And she took me aside. She saw I was struggling with this, saying, oh, we're fine, we have insurance. And she said, Sandra, your job right now is to be a grateful recipient. There's that gratitude again, right? I was not being a grateful recipient. I was saying, no, we're fine. I even gave a check back to a woman, and that was a disaster because she has never forgotten that. You gave it back. You wouldn't take my check. So this is how I learned the importance of being a grateful recipient. If you want to be a helper, when you actually need help, then give someone else the opportunity to help you. Because we all know we're helpers, how important that is and how good we feel when we can help someone else. All right, so there's that. I also want to point out that our emergency responders are stepping up more and more and admitting that these events, some of them are having a lasting effect on their personal psychology. There was a fire in the Bay Area, the Ghost Ship Fire. Do you all remember that last year? And they lost 36 people. And after that, some of the television stations in the Bay Area got together and they worked with a psychological association and they put together a survey and they asked people from, I think I have that slide here. Do I? All right, so obviously we've moved on to step 3. Did you notice that? Just seamless transition there. Not only wise, but essential to accept. I get so excited about sharing this. I forget my slides are up there. Yeah, so they asked these people, 700 firefighters from 13 departments responded to this. And the question was, do you believe your stressful experiences as a firefighter cause lingering or unresolved emotional issues, yes or no? 77% admitted yes. I would suggest that those of you who are disaster workers are also susceptible to that same level of stress and trauma. Would you agree? I mean, the things that you see, the people that you deal with. I was a disaster worker for a while. I had, one of the big Newfoundland dogs that I took out of the fire was a wonderful therapy dog. And then we went and got additional training and became a crisis response team. And so we would go to fire camps where all the firefighters would live for a couple of weeks fighting a big fire, or shelters. And I was fine as long as we could just talk with the firefighters. But then I went to a shelter, and there was a man there who was distraught because he had been away from home when his neighborhood was evacuated in the face of an oncoming fire. And he couldn't get in to save his dog, and he didn't know what was going on with his dog. Well, here I am with my dog. I'm obviously a dog lover. He didn't know if his house was still standing, but more importantly, he didn't know about his dog, and they wouldn't let him go back, and they were trying to send in, where are my animal assistance people in here? God bless you. They were going in and they were leaving water and food, right, for the animals that had been stranded, but he couldn't get in, and he was a mess, and I stood there absorbing his agony, and then I was a mess, and I had to go out and debrief with a friend and say, oh, that was my worst nightmare, that I wouldn't have been able to get my animals out. So we get triggered by this stuff. If you don't take anything else away from our time today, I want you to remember to follow your bobcat, and sometimes that bobcat can be a helper, even a professional counselor who can help you deal with this emotional effect. I also like to tell people like you who are heroes in the wake of disaster about the hero's journey. Any of you heard of the hero's journey? Anybody? Joseph Campbell's hero's journey? Okay, we have somebody. So this is great because now I get to tell you about it. All right, so Joseph Campbell was a mythologist, and that's a cool job, right? Like, I'm just going to study stories all the time. So he looked at all of these stories from across time, different centuries, different cultures, and he looked at these legendary stories that were part of these cultures, and he found out that they all had some common pieces, kind of like I found out that there were these common steps to resilience. So Joseph Campbell decided that he was going to just dissect this and figure it all out, and he came up with what we now call the hero's journey. You can go see this video online. I'm not going to play it for you, but you can go to YouTube and Google the hero's journey, and it looks like this, and it gives you a cartoon version, but I'm going to condense that. The hero's journey is when an everyday person, how many of us consider ourselves, we're everyday people, all right? Everyday person just living his or her life, and suddenly there is a call. There's a call to adventure. There's a call to help someone else. And so this everyday person answers the call, and they literally step into a new dimension. They step across a threshold. Anybody feel like they're in a new dimension when they're working a disaster? You think my smoke and fire and all that was a different dimension? Yes, in fact, I think I even said a different dimension. So this is what happens with heroes. They start as everyday people. They're not necessarily looking for excitement, but they're called to something bigger and they step across and they answer the call. And when they get across, the second step after that is they get help from a wise guide or mentor. They get help. They accept help. And sometimes they get like a magical tool to help them, like a sword or something, and then they go out on this quest to do this impossible thing. Usually in the olden days, it was a dragon that was threatening the village. There were a lot of dragons that needed to be killed in those days. So they go out and they do battle with this dragon, and they almost don't make it. So think of the point in a James Bond movie where you think, this is the last James Bond movie, because he ain't getting out of this. Remember that point? But of course, he always does. Whoever is the James Bond du jour always gets, whichever actor, always gets out of it, and there's another one. This is that point when the hero is almost killed, but no, he or she makes it out, gets back to the village, usually brings a beautiful gift for the village, has saved the village. The village people may not even know that there was a dragon that needed to be slain, but their hero has saved them. So this is how everyday people become heroes. All right, I want you to see how this story plays out in some of our most popular stories today. You know this hero's journey already. Use the Force, Luke. Here's a cool toy to play with. Luke could not have destroyed the Death Star without help from Obi-Wan, who taught him how to use this Force that he already had. He had this magic superpower, but he just didn't know it, and he didn't know how to use it. If he had not accepted help from Obi-Wan, oh well, it would have been a different story, and there probably wouldn't have been a whole lot more Star Wars movies. Here's another one. Harry Potter, expecto patronum. So who is this character? Come on, you're Harry Potter people, I know. Who is this bearded wonder man here? Dumbledore, thank you, the professor at Hogwarts who helped. Dumbledore helped Harry discover the power that he already had, right? He already was the greatest wizard ever born, but he didn't know it. He accepted help from Dumbledore. Here's another one. Girls can be heroes too. Dorothy never would have made it home from Oz to Kansas if it weren't for Glinda the Good Witch, who told her, just click your the ruby slippers. Do you know you can see them at the Smithsonian? They're there, by the way. I saw them. Click these ruby slippers together and say 3 times, there's no place like home, there's no place like... She had the power. It wasn't the shoes. It was her. And Glinda helped her find that power. Now, I also think that we need to keep in mind that sometimes help comes from unexpected sources. We never know. Sometimes the people that we think are just the weirdest turn out to be the most helpful in our journey. Okay, so I want you to just keep that in mind the next time you're out there and you're thinking, I can't admit that I need help here because I am 911. The hero's journey teaches us that it's an inescapable part of your quest, of your success, to accept help and maybe a lightsaber from other people, from a wise guide or mentor, and they will come into your life, especially if you're looking for them, and know to follow them. Those bobcats are going to come into your life. You just have to know to follow it. Okay, moving on here. All right, have you written down step 3 on the back of your card? Let's wind up this point with this quote from Brene Brown. Anybody know Brene Brown? She's having a moment. She's very popular. She's been on Oprah, your neighbor Oprah. She talks about the power of vulnerability. And this also speaks to our own story. Sometimes these stories that I'm talking about, these stories that taught us the power of our own resilience, sometimes we don't want to share them. They feel kind of messy. We think, oh, we don't want people to know that, we had to struggle, or, well, Brene Brown found that being vulnerable, being appropriately vulnerable, you don't want to just blap too much information all over the place, but telling the right stories the right way is very powerful. It connects you with people, and it enables you to do what you're here in the world to do. And here's what she said: until we can receive with an open heart, we're never really giving with an open heart. When we attach judgment to receiving help, we knowingly or unknowingly attach judgment to giving help. Did you ever think about that? This was kind of an eye-opener for me, because we're the givers. We can only give as much as we receive from others. Wow. That's something to think about. Okay. Are you ready for another exercise? You're getting very brave now. Thank you. I'm glad. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a similar thing to what we did before. Thanks for sharing. All right. So find a partner. You might want to get a new partner, unless you and your first partner are already engaged or something. And then I want you to talk about, what, do we have engagements in here and no one even mentioned it, do we? Well, we'll talk about that later. I want you to think about something traumatic that happened to you, and it could be on the job, as this indicates, but I'm going to expand it today because we're talking about the power of your own personal comeback journey. It might be that bombshell moment that divided your life into before and after. It's something tough that you've been through. And I want you to share that with your buddy. You don't have to go super deep, but I just want you to share it. Now, here is the part that your partner plays. This is going to be hard. Don't try to fix it. I know, we want to fix it, right? Don't try to fix it. So your job is just to listen. Just to listen, just keep it zipped. Let them tell their story. And at the end of their story, and I'll give you like a couple minutes on the clock here so you'll know, your job as the listener is just to say, thank you for sharing your story. I hear you. I hear you. So you're letting them know their story landed with you. You are a receiver of the story. This is also about giving and receiving. Can you do that? Yes, you can. All right. So the first person, you know what you're doing now? The first person, let's see, what's another distinguisher? All right, the person with, I was going to say with the darker shirt on, but this whole section is in dark blue, so that's not going to work. I'm going to let you sort it out. Who goes first? One person tells your story of a tough time in your life and how that affected you personally and professionally, and the other person listens to that story. All right, here we go. What happened? What happened? Now, I gave you a little starter story. This one, I imagine, was a deeper story. Did you feel okay? Did you feel safe sharing that story? Yeah, this is a safe room. We're all helpers here, right? Did you feel heard? If your partner was checking Facebook on their phone while you were trying to tell your story, I'll take care of them outside later. Just let me know afterwards. I could have told you that, but I was hoping I didn't have to mention it. All right. How did it feel, listeners, to hear that story? Was it frustrating not to be able to jump in and, yes, I know, we want to fix it. All right. How did it make you feel about the speaker? Let me put that another way. Did anybody think less of the speaker for sharing a vulnerable story about a tough time when maybe they struggled? Did anybody relate? Did anybody feel more respect for that speaker? More of a sense of connection? This is what sharing our stories does for us. It doesn't make us less powerful. It makes us more powerful. What other ahas might have come up from this exercise? Anybody want to? Yes, in the back. Bad things happen all the time to a lot of people. And why do we keep going on? Why can we go on? Because we are naturally resilient. Yes, somebody else over here. Yes.
There's a tendency to shut down, especially for men.
Uh-huh.
That something bad happens or difficult, they'll withdraw and shut down. Sorry about that. I think we have this tendency to think that admit that we need help or to reach out for help, character flaw or a
Exactly what we're talking about here.
try to put on a mask to pretend we're strong when to avoid that sense of disrespect. The person that's willing to help you, that's expressing some kind of
Right. What if your story, with that power you just experienced to connect to other people, what if that were your magic tool? What if that were your lightsaber? What if your story was your ruby red slippers? Stories connect us to people. And when you're working with people, you want to be connected. That's what Rob was saying at the top of our time here, is to really understand and empathize with the people that you're working with in all of their messiness, because they are in the middle of a crisis. Sometimes it can help to just share a little bit of your own story, not in a know-it-all way, but just in a very human way. That's the power of your own story. All right, so we are going to power through the rest of this. Speaking of power, thank you for your courage in doing that exercise. I really appreciate it. The fourth step of the comeback story is to choose your response. Now, this is what I learned early on, and I learned it from Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian psychiatrist who was caught up in the Holocaust. He lost his entire family in the Holocaust, and he was imprisoned at Dachau, at Auschwitz for years. He managed to last until he was released, and he wrote this beautiful book called Man's Search for Meaning, and in that book, he wrote, the last of the human freedoms is to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. That spoke to me. That's what made me think, wow, I wonder if there's a common set of principles that helps us come back, no matter what the loss, what the challenge. And even though I couldn't compare my situation to Viktor Frankl, I resonated with his message. So Viktor Frankl taught me that we can choose. And I just want to add here very quickly, sometimes this choice has to happen over and over and over again. You don't just wake up one morning and say, all right, I'm done with this disaster. I am choosing to be a victor. Like Viktor Frankl, he was well named, wasn't he? You have to choose that over and over again because it is a process, it's a journey. So write on the back of your card, step number 4. Did we get number 3? I think, did we? Okay, number 4 is to choose your response. You get to choose, no matter what happened. No matter how shitty it was, you still get to choose your response. Don't tell my mother I said that. Okay. She would be upset. All right. Michael J. Fox, we know his story, right? Wonder Kid, incredible young actor. He got Parkinson's when he was only 30 years old. And he has gone on to start a foundation, to fund research. He has turned his personal loss into a legacy for other people. Here's what he said: I have no choice about whether or not I have Parkinson's. I have nothing but choice about how I react to it. And in those choices, there's freedom to do things in areas I wouldn't have otherwise found myself in. Which brings us to the last, which will bring us in one moment to the last principle. But first, let me talk really quickly. Let me give you a couple ideas on how to make this choice real in your life day by day. We can give ourselves a new mantra. It's astounding and it's shocking how much negative self-talk goes on in our brains. If we had a person who followed us around and told us the kind of stuff that we tell ourselves every day, we would say, get lost. Who needs you? You're my worst enemy. But we do that to ourselves, so we can shift that. We don't have to be victims. We can if we want to, like, you know, the guy who lost his garage. We can also say, I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor, and I'm going to be a thriver. And then I'm going to give from my experience, and then I'm going to change things like Michael J. Fox. That's our choice, and we can give our brain a new mantra to counter all this negative talk. We can be here now. This speaks to the whole area of mindfulness. You're in Santa Barbara. You can find a lot of sources to help you with the mindfulness piece. I'm just going to say that it's very powerful to be here now instead of in your head spinning through your backstory or making up new disaster reels for the future. It's very powerful to take a deep breath and to be in this moment right now and to ask yourself, what am I lacking right now? What are we lacking right now? We're in air conditioning. It's 115 in the desert. You know, we are in a pretty good place right now, right in this moment. So those are some tools. Keep moving forward. This is what Michael J. Fox was talking about. And yes, this is your last principle to write on the back of your card. It's very tough to accept what's happened to us in the middle of a disaster. It's very hard to accept and understand and wrap our heads around the fact that things are never going to be the same. I was never going to get my old house back. I had to let go of that. And again, this is a process. Sometimes we can't let go right away. We just have to get used to the idea. But if we try to hang on to this past that can never come back, we can never rise above it and move on and grow and turn that tragedy, turn that loss into blessings for other people. So we have to let go of this past that can never return. What we get to do instead is to look ahead to the new opportunities. That's what Michael J. Fox was talking about. Areas that he had never thought would be available to him to change the world. He's been able to do because of, not in spite of, but because of the disaster that befell him. So this is number 5. I want to add to this. Let's see if I have it here. Yes, thank you. Very important part of moving forward is forgiveness. Now, I had to forgive myself. Sometimes we have to forgive ourselves. I had to forgive myself because in my haste to leave my house, I didn't stop long enough to close the garage door. And the electricity was out, so I couldn't just hit the button on the garage door opener and closer. And I knew that because of that, my house was doomed. The embers, the fire was going to get in there. I didn't know whether or not it might have survived otherwise. I didn't know that. I can't know that. Some of my neighbors said 10 years after the fact, my gosh, Sandra, I can't believe you carried that. I mean, they were all going to go. I mean, it was just a blowtorch up there. I had to forgive myself. I also had to forgive Sergio Martinez. He was the guy that lit the fire. He was a lost hunter. He lit a signal fire way out in the wilderness, right ahead of a Santa Ana wind in the worst possible fire risk conditions, the perfect firestorm. And it killed 15 people, and it burned 2,232 houses. And I followed him. I followed his court proceedings because I was researching, and there was a chance that I had to speak to him. I saw him after he pleaded guilty. He did a plea bargain, and he went over to this window of the courthouse, and for once, nobody was around him. He had been inaccessible. This is like a year and a half after the fire. I couldn't get to him. His lawyer was protecting him. He's all by himself, and I went over, and I looked at him, and I thought, that guy's in trouble. That guy needs somebody to throw him a life ring because he had tremendous remorse about this. He was just trying to save his own life. He didn't mean to do what he did. So then I thought, I could do that. I'm in a position to do that. So I went over to him and I said, Sergio, my name is Sandra, and I lost my house in the fire, and I just want you to know that I forgive you. And he said, thank you. And then a few proceedings down the line of his long drawn-out court drama, he saw me in the hall and he recognized me, and he said to me, I'm sorry about your house. And I said, thank you. I hear you, right? And Sergio and I are square. Now, I don't know if it helped Sergio, as I'd hoped it would, that I forgave him. But what I know is it helped me. So I want you to think about who is holding you back. Not because of what they did, but because you have had a hard time forgiving them. Who do you need to forgive to free yourself? It's a critical part of the comeback formula. All right. This guy, very quickly, this guy is a portrait of how sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the best things. I don't have time to tell his story, but let's just say that before the Beijing Olympics in 2008, like just a few months before, he slipped on the pool pavement and broke his wrist. And everybody was saying, oh my gosh, is Michael Phelps going to be able to even compete in the Olympics? And Michael Phelps said, well, sure, I am. And so he wrapped up his wrist and he got a kickboard and he kept practicing just with his kick. He didn't use his stroke at all. And as we know, he's freakishly long in the torso, and so that makes him this mutant swimming savant, right? So he couldn't use any of that at all. He had to go with the weaker part of his body, his legs. So when he got to Beijing, he found himself in his 7th of 8 races, and he had set a modest goal of winning the gold in all 7 of them, which of course put him ahead of, what's his name, Mark Spitz. I wasn't going to tell the story, but I can't help it. So he was behind another swimmer, and what did he do? He poured it on with this powerful kick, and he won by 1/100th of a second. And his coach even said, you know what, if he hadn't broken his arm, that never would have happened. He never would have won that race. So sometimes the worst things can become the best things. We can transform disaster into opportunity. This is a great author who has this quote about that. We can always give meaning to what happens to us and transform it into something better. So I've given you a hint now that the comeback formula is only the first part of this whole comeback journey. And here's what it is. You can go from being a victim to a survivor, and then you can go to being a thriver, because I didn't want to camp out on the ash heap that used to be my house. I wanted to rebuild, and I wanted to reboot, and I wanted to come back stronger than before. And then sometimes when we come that far on the comeback journey, then we want to take another step, because we've learned so much. We now have something to share. And so we become givers. That's who you are. You're giving back. Some of you are getting paid for it. Some of you aren't. You're giving. And then there are a few people who take it a step further. You don't have to. Giving is a great way to lead, to live. It's a great way to lead. It's what makes the world go round. But a few people feel this call. Remember the hero's journey? They feel the call to step across the threshold into a different dimension and leverage their loss into legacy. These are those people. These are a few of these people. Every one of them, tremendous tragedy in their background that they transformed. We would not know about them if they didn't tell their story. But I want to suggest to you that it's not just these global figures. It's everyday people. I want to confess to you that I didn't tell my comeback story for a long time because I thought, I just lost my stuff. There are people who have lost children. And I was hesitant. I thought, what do I have to share with them? Who am I to get up on a stage and tell them how to be resilient? And then I met this woman. She's coming up. Your story is powerful, is the point of this next slide. You may not have a Bobcat story. You may not have driven through fire, although I know some of you have. But your story is powerful because it's going to be the perfect story for your perfect audience. When you tell that story, they're going to hear it as their story. And here's the woman who taught me that lesson. Her name is Rena. She's become a dear friend. This is Rena and her 15-year-old son, Eric. As you can see, Eric is a sports guy, right? He's on the wrestling team. He was trying out for football. Loving family, beautiful family. At the age of 15, Eric dropped dead on Rena's kitchen floor. No signs, no symptoms, no clues. He became a victim of sudden cardiac death, which kills 7,000 kids in the United States alone every year. Who knew, right? It's something that's usually not caught because we don't do EKG screenings on kids as a general rule. Rena was a nurse. She'd never heard of it. And she was so devastated by losing her beautiful son that she could barely get out of bed for months, she told me. But when she did, she decided that she was going to do something to spare other people the heartache that had hit her family. And so she created the Eric Peretta Save a Life Foundation. And she worked with cardiologists and other people at the hospital where she was employed as a nurse. And she created a foundation, and she screens teenagers for the kinds of undiagnosed cardiac abnormalities that killed her son. She's screened now, she and her team, 23,000 kids. And 1% are at risk of sudden cardiac death. When she finds them, she refers them and they go get help. So Rena has saved over 200 families, the heartbreak that she still lives with every day. That's an everyday hero, right? That's somebody who has transformed her tragedy into a legacy that benefits other people. When Rena heard my story at an event, 600 people I'm talking to, one person follows up with me, and it's Rena. It was the first time I'd had the guts to tell my comeback story, to talk about the comeback formula, to say, I have something to share with you. And I was nervous. Rena followed up with me, and she said, when you told your story, I heard my story. And so I thought, I get it. I need to be spreading this message. I need to quit saying my story's not powerful enough. I need to quit discounting the fact that I'd only lost my stuff. Our stories are more powerful than we know. You are the most qualified person in the world to tell your story, but you probably are the least qualified person in the world to evaluate your story. These bombshell stories you've been looking at today, how many of you think nobody cares about that story? Nobody's going to be interested in that. Or it's too messy to share, or I don't know, I got a lot of stories. How do I know that's the one to tell? Any of you throwing shade at your own story like that? Yeah, so did I. So what I want to suggest to you is that your stories are your secret weapon, your lightsaber in your work as disaster responders. If you get in touch with the power of your own comeback journey, it will enable you to be more efficient, more effective, more empathetic professionals in the field in the wake of disaster. So what I want to offer you, remember I promised you a gift, is a workbook that I have that goes further into this. That's right, and Kathleen has some sheets for you. If you would like to have a copy of this workbook that really goes into depth on what I could only share the tip of the iceberg on today, just give me your email address and let me know, and I will send you a link to a PDF that you can download. If you would like to look further into your own story and really, maybe for the first time, delve into the power that's hidden there, to unlock the power that's there, that is going to help you understand more clearly than ever before why you do what you do and how you can convey and communicate and pass on that power to other people, let's talk about that. There's a box there you can check that says, I want to talk with Sandra about my story. Is that what it said? I hope it says that there. Yes, I'd like a conversation. Free conversation. We'll talk for 20 or 30 minutes and just talk about your story power. If you know of anyone else who would like to hear this message, if you want to help me get the message out, there's another box you can check there. You have a story. It's powerful. The work you do is powerful. You are naturally resilient. And yet, you now have a toolbox of 5 principles that I wish I'd had summarized in such a succinct fashion during my own comeback journey. So never doubt that you're naturally resilient. Never doubt that you and your teams and your community has the power to transform loss into legacy, to transform disaster into opportunity. Thanks so much for listening to what I have to say and for taking action on whatever serves you and your people. Thank you.